Back in 1995, it was determined, and this was in Circulation, which is the American Heart Association's, one of their journals. Most heart attacks are caused by non-obstructing plaque. Historically, we thought that those vessels around the heart were just getting filled in with cholesterol, and you can still see advertisements that are talking about that. That plays a key role in cardiovascular disease, but it is not the majority of the reason why heart attacks show up. It's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. And this one is important because it shows that 86% of heart attacks occur in people with less than 70% obstruction. So that means only 14% of heart attacks occur with the people that have obstruction of those vessels that are over 70%. So it's not an completely occluded vessel that causes the problem, it's the health of the wall. And that leads to inflammation is the problem. This one is probably the biggest deal in causation for heart attacks and strokes. In Lancet in 2012, a study came out, causality of inflammation in regards to coronary heart disease. And if you've noticed, marketing teams and stories in magazines and in the media, everything is talking about inflammation. You can't go through probably an episode of television without seeing 5 commercials on reducing inflammation. That's because of this research in Lancet. This is a big deal. When you go to causality, there's no causality of high cholesterol with cardiovascular disease. There's no causality for LDL cholesterol. That's the world we live in. But they have causality for inflammation. So I'd like everybody to take a look at this particular diagram. And the best way to explain this is a mock-up of a vessel around the heart. There's only about 12 to 14 inches of vessels around the heart, and we spend an enormous amount of money taking care of diseases that come about because of those vessels. So diseased vessels around the heart are involved with strokes, they're involved with cardiovascular disease, they're involved with pulmonary problems, there's also inflammation that probably causes problems throughout our bodies. So this is a very important diagram to take a look at. So this is different stages of disease and different stages of health of vessels around the heart. If you look to the left, that is a virtually healthy portion of a vessel. As you go to the right, you go through different stages of disease progression. And there are markers for that, and there are also players for that. That means that there are things we can test for that are given off by those vessels that are part of the activity of disease. So as you go across, if you just look at the vessel itself, it gradually gets smaller, the wall gets thicker, and the wall gets diseased. That is a progression of, the best way to describe it is the wall is getting hotter. That's inflammation, it's getting inflamed. So at the left we have very healthy vessel. As we progress you see oxidation. At that point we're starting to get some thickening. We're also starting to get macrophages entering the area trying to fight substances that are present. Now, right before C-reactive protein, the hsCRP, is the stage where oxidized LDL shows up. And that, as I go through some of the research going forward, it'll show you how oral pathogens are involved with the progression of macrophages going into the wall. They fight substances that are being laid down, oxidized LDL. This is kind of a short layman's version of what's going on, and it's a very simplified version of a very complicated situation, but it'll give you some ideas of the total of it. But as that transition occurs from foam cells, we start to get different materials that are given off. C-reactive protein is elevated, and we can find that. There's plaque deposited in the wall. It's thickening. Remember, if it's thickening here, it's most probably thickening here. So that's one of the ways we progress and we're able to evaluate. After that, you get into the next stage, which has MPO and LPPLA2. And I'll go further through this, but just be watching for these. These are different levels of the progression of cardiovascular disease. the different importance of these materials that are given off, elevated oxidized LDL states that we will have long-term problems with cardiovascular disease. If we have elevated C-reactive protein, there's a pretty good chance we're going to have some intermediate-term problems. If you have elevated MPO or LPPLA2, that means you've got a pretty hot wall around your heart. These are all things that can be tested for, and that tells us that you're going to have a short-term problem, and we have to be a little more aggressive with the approach. Now, I'm a dentist. It's my job to show you how this is impacted with oral, so that's where we're going next.